Imagine you are in charge of this Airbus 330 flying from Toronto to Lisbon. You left Toronto 5 hours ago. You are over the North Atlantic. Outside your windscreen, there is nothing. No ships, no lights around. Peaceful. You are cruising at 39,000 feet. There are 306 people asleep behind you. The nearest land is the Azores, still hundreds of kilometers away. You glance at the fuel display. Something isn't right. The right tank has noticeably less fuel than the left. Not alarming, just odd. You've seen instrument problems before. You've seen fuel imbalances before. A few minutes later, the levels are more unequal. You contact air traffic control. Transat 236, we have a fuel emergency. Then you open the crossfeed to rebalance the tanks. Unbeknownst to you, that has made the situation catastrophically worse, because the aircraft doesn't have a fuel imbalance, it has a fuel leak from a ruptured fuel line. Every kilogram of fuel that you are transferring across is pouring out of the aircraft into the Atlantic behind you. The aircraft had said there was a fuel imbalance. So you've done what experienced pilots do. You solved the problem of the fuel imbalance by rebalancing the fuel. 20 minutes later, you realise the scale of the problem as the right engine falls silent. Santa Maria, we've lost our right engine. A few minutes later, the left engine also falls silent. Now you are no longer flying an airliner. You are flying a 200-ton glider. Reaching Lisbon is impossible. The Azores become your only hope of landing on land. Mayday! 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 In the next 19 minutes, Captain Robert Pichet glides a powerless Airbus over 120 kilometres to a safe landing in the Azores. Every one of those 306 people survives. Yes, the captain did a good job in landing the aircraft in the Azores with no loss of life. But why? Why did this happen? This wasn't a technology failure. The dashboard was telling the truth. The pilot solved the wrong problem. Instead of asking the one question that mattered, what else could explain what we're seeing? Now you might be thinking, that's aviation. My business isn't an Airbus. But what struck me is this aircraft was not brought down by a lack of information. It was brought down by a misinterpretation of that information. And I see exactly the same pattern in organisations. It is important to always ask what else could explain what we're seeing. I've used this story for many, many years because I've never found a better example of organisations having all the information they needed, yet still making the wrong decision. Let's leave aviation for a moment and come back to Australia. Nearly 1 in 3 Australian small businesses considered closing last year. Do you think all of those businesses suddenly became unprofitable in June? Of course not. But 28% of Australian small businesses considered shutting their doors last year, not because they forgot how to run a business, not because they stopped working hard, but simply because the financial result revealed something that had been happening for a long time. The decision to cease trading wasn't caused by the numbers, but was caused by their understanding of the business had stopped working long before the numbers revealed it. Businesses rarely fail because nobody looked at the numbers. They fail because people misinterpret those numbers. Let me give you a real example. A few years ago, I was working with a client. Every week before the sales meeting, accounts updated an Excel spreadsheet. Every salesperson, every forecast, every hoped for dollar of gross profit. Then the managing director walked into the room. He looked at one number: gross profit. That number drove every conversation. Everything revolved around that number. Although they had a CRM, they had set it up so badly and their adoption was so poor that they relied instead on this weekly spreadsheet. The data did not come from their CRM. Instead, the sales team simply told the MD what he wanted to hear. But watching a burning house does not put out the fire. You have to find what started the fire and deal with that. So why do we manage businesses by watching the outcome instead of dealing with what creates it? What I'm about to show you is how to create a true view of your targets and how you can see where your point of no return sits. Once you have this, you can then monitor the correct metrics, support your team well, and achieve those targets. How would you feel if this was your dashboard, showing that you are over 21% behind target currently, with only a few days until the end of the financial year? I'm sure that you would agree that while you might be able to improve the result, there is almost no chance of meeting target. However, are you surprised that the target was missed several weeks or months ago? In most organisations, the actual revenues are decided long before they hit the bank. In the next few minutes, I'm going to introduce you to a way of understanding, seeing, and influencing your targets well in advance, and enable you to be sure of what's creating the result. If I wanted to change this result next quarter, what would I actually change? And we're going to do that looking at what I call the profit pyramid. And this is the profit pyramid. We've spent several minutes talking about why organisations get into trouble. let's spend the next few minutes building something practical. This one diagram completely changed how I think about revenue. This links your target, whether that's profit or revenue, or even a non-monetary target, to the effort and work that it takes to achieve that profit or revenue. So if we start from the revenue target, we then look at the average order value. That gives us the orders required. We then look at the quotes that you need to raise in order to get one order. That gives us the total quotes required. And then we look at the leads that we need to get a quote. And from that, we can work out what are the total touch points with prospects or customers that we need to do to achieve that revenue or profit target. So, looking at an example business, and we're going to then look at your business. What is, and I'm not asking people to share this publicly, but this page exists in the workbook. So start by putting down what is your profit or revenue target, probably for this financial year. And then, on average, what is the size of an order? And then from that you can calculate the number of orders, and then work out or put the average of how many quotes, and this is not revisions of quotes, this is quotes to different prospects, do you need to prepare and submit to receive one order. From that, how many quotes do you have to submit to meet your target? Then work out how many leads are required to get one quote, and therefore how many meaningful customer interactions do you have with each lead, and that will then give you the number of touch points that you need to be able to submit one quote. So that's just a straightforward piece of maths. And then in the workbook, I've also given you this worked example. So this is the same formulae applied to some samples. Work through, and obviously I will be here if you've got any questions, but work through what the profit pyramid looks like for your business. And if you don't know any of the numbers exactly, just go with a fair approximation. Okay, ready to move on? How many of you found that interesting or surprising as far as the actual number that it spat out at the bottom? Okay, I am now moving on, and we've rotated the profit pyramid. What we're now doing is looking at the length of the sales cycle. So it's a very similar diagram, but now we've got the time from receiving an order to getting the revenue in the bank. How long is that? And then the time from submitting the quote to receiving the order, the time from the initial meeting to a quote, and the time from the lead entering your world to initial meeting. So similar, but we're now looking at time. So if you'd like to go back to your workbook and have a look at the second exercise, the second calculation, and that will tell you how long it takes, again, on average, from a lead to enter your world through to their revenue, their first revenue, hitting the bank. Not surprisingly, sales cycles vary enormously. Boeing say that theirs averages 7 years. Some are only minutes. Yours are almost certainly in between those two numbers. And now we're rotating the profit pyramid again, and we're looking at the effort required. So we've looked at the out and out time. So that's just absolute elapsed time from a lead entering your world to their first lot of money hitting the bank. We're now moving on and looking at the actual effort, how much work is required from the team as a whole to close or to put revenue in the bank. Again, we're breaking it down. So we want to know the time required to manage the finances of one order, the time to create and process an order, and those of you that are selling stuff of some sort, that also includes all the picking and packing of an order. And if you need to buy stuff in from suppliers, it includes that as well. Then we have the time it takes to create each quote and the time to arrange and be part of an initial meeting. So this is the absolute effort, and typically I would expect you to do this one in hours. But as long as you're consistent, it really doesn't matter. How much effort across the team as a whole is required for you to achieve your target. And for this one, the number of orders and the number of quotes you will pull through from the first exercise. So now what we're looking at is very similar to the previous piece, where we looked at the overall effort for the team. What we're now looking at is specifically your effort or your leadership team effort. And you will get similar but different numbers for these. So what's the leadership time to manage the finances of one order? Leadership time to create and process an order, leadership time for the quote, and leadership time for the meetings. And again, if you'd like to have a look in your business at what that looks like. So, what we've just looked at is 4 dimensions of the profit pyramid. The first dimension is how many interactions do you need to make to meet your target. Then we looked at the length of the sales cycle, how much total work, and how much leadership effort or leadership time is required for the organisation to meet their target. What you've just built is much bigger than a sales funnel. It is a management system. And what we're looking at is lead and lag indicators. So the activities or the interactions are lead indicators. The profit or the revenue is a lag indicator. The Air Transat fuel indicator was a lag indicator. The managing director that I talked to you about, who was totally focused on gross profit, that is a lag indicator. Your monthly, quarterly or annual revenue is a lag indicator. The profit pyramid exposes lead indicators. And now what we're going to do is bring all of this together for you. So I'd like you to think about the number of interactions that you need, the time that it takes the organisation or the sales team as a whole, the sales cycle length and the leadership effort, and I would like you to traffic light them, and traffic light them based on whether that is achievable. And then think about it from our current position here at the end of July, so a 12th of the way through the sales cycle for those people who are using a normal Australian sales cycle. And just think, are they green, which means they're good, on target? If everything continues as it is, you will meet target. Amber means that you're off track and need some management attention. And red means that you're in serious trouble. I'm not asking you to share that publicly, but I have given you in your workbook a page of this jigsaw that is lacking colour. And what I'd like you all to do is to colour, or if you don't have coloured pens or markers available, just write red, green, amber onto the 4 jigsaw sections, jigsaw pieces. Okay, so now we are moving on. So some of you may recognise that past the point of no return. And if you're anything like me, you'd happily spend the rest of the morning listening to Phantom of the Opera. Unfortunately, I'm talking about a different point of no return. And we're going to keep going with the aviation theme here. Every flight has a point of no return. The point at which there isn't enough fuel for the plane to return to its origin. Your sales cycle also has a point at which it has become highly unlikely that you will meet target, because there is not enough time for you to close enough orders to meet target, or there is just not enough time for you to do the work to close enough orders. And that is based on your normal sales cycle, your average deal size, and your historical conversion rate. What you've seen earlier on this morning is, using those numbers, you can now calculate where is the point in your financial year or quarter or month or whatever you want to use, when it is highly unlikely that unless a miracle happens, you will meet target. Or to look at that slightly differently, when is the point in the year when you have probably run out of time? And what might surprise you is that many businesses don't know when that is. What we've got here is a sales performance dashboard that is focused on all of those leading indicators. So I'm not going to go through all of this with you, but you'll see how the focus along the top is much more activity and interaction rather than revenue, because as we've seen, revenue is a lag indicator, whereas the interactions are a leading indicator. And if you boost the numbers of your interactions and boost the quality of the interactions, you will almost certainly boost the revenue or profit that they generate. So your CRM, whatever CRM that is, can help with a lot of this. But you need to set it up so that it is measuring automatically the interactions more so than the actual revenue. While this is possible from a good CRM, it is, in my experience, a very unusual dashboard. Most dashboards are much more like this one, and you can see how by contrast this one is all the lag indicators. Okay, we're now into the final straight. And as I've already alluded to, your financial statements tell you what has happened. Anything financial, or pretty much anything financial, is the rear view mirror. And the rear view mirror is essential. They tell you where you've been, and they tell you what's happening as a result of where you've been, where you've driven. But the rear view mirror does not steer the car. It's your sales process and interaction management that tell you what will happen. And just as when driving a car, you need a rear view mirror and a windscreen and a steering wheel, as well as a number of other components, when you're driving sales success, you need your lag indicators to be saying the right thing, but definitely you need all of the leading indicators, and you need those leading indicators to take a form that you can see what is likely to happen. Remember the client that I mentioned earlier where the MD demanded gross profit? They weren't managing gross profit. They were reporting gross profit. And nobody discussed the things that led to gross profit. The MD was obsessed with gross profit, but he was obsessed with a lag indicator, and he wanted an answer without helping with any of the controllable factors. The number of meetings and the quality of meetings are things that you can influence. The revenue and the profit comes off the back of that. The MD was not asking the right questions, because gross profit is not something that you can influence directly. Not understanding what dashboards are showing you, or worse still, not having the right dashboards, may push you to close down the business. Or maybe it will force you to do an emergency landing, perhaps a long way from home. We've spent a chunk of time this morning showing you and learning how you can spot a problem before it arises, how you can spot a June problem before June arrives. One of the tools that can help you do this is a CRM, but a CRM will only help you with that if it is set up correctly. And I'd also like to add that pretty much all the mainstream CRM solutions will help, but they can also all not help. And the difference between whether the selected CRM will help or will just be a hindrance is how it is set up. I'm planning on running another of these events, which will be looking at a number of factors that are important in the setup of a CRM and how you can ensure that your CRM, whatever the chosen technology is, will enable you to see all of those leading indicators and so keep your CRM out of the money pit. I would love to continue this conversation, and that QR code will enable you to book a complimentary clarity conversation. And we'll look in that conversation, we will look at your numbers and make sure that yours are on target to achieve what you're hoping to achieve. Or if it's not, if they're not on target, what can be done using CRM, using some other changes to get back on target. At the point of no